What's up, folks? This is Melanie. I use they, them, theirs pronouns, and this channel is called Mobity, where I share how I move through my life experiences, particularly through books. Next is Made in Korea by Sarah Suk. I'm gonna look that up later. So this book, what starts as a rivalry, turns into a mutual understanding of each other's dream. And there's this sense of doing something for ourselves to be able to prove our value to our families. This is such a difficult thing for a teenager to have to be calculating. But I think it is very common as a skewed American immigrant theme, you know what I mean? So in this story, we have Wes, who's a new kid at school, and he's been selling Crown Tiger, which is a K-pop group, Crown Tiger's merchandise, so he can afford music school application that his parents don't know about. Then we have Valerie. Valerie is a budding young businesswoman who's built up VNC Beauty with her cousin Charlie. They sell various beauty products to their high school demographic, and she's doing this so she can prove her worth to her parents and be able to take her grandma, her homely, on a trip of a lifetime to Paris. There's bonus friendships here between Wes and his business partner Pauline, another student, as it shows a healthy heterosexual friendship. Being a third culture kid, that is, child who grows up in a culture which is different from their parents, is something both main characters struggle with, as their parents' expectations are based on their particular experiences of a hardship, rather than giving space for their children to figure things out for themselves. As I think about becoming a parent, probably in the next 10 years, I consider the feelings of these characters being so similar to what I felt in high school. This pressure to succeed, this pressure to be compared to my brother, this pressure to not end up like a failure, but being able to encourage a kid someday to do what they want and to do it well without my own projections of what they should or could or need to be based on what I think is right. It can be really suffocating to have a predetermined life, especially before you've even had time to really try things out, which takes time. Next, we have Frankly in Love by David Hume. So Frankly in Love's synopsis is that Frank pretends to be in a relationship with someone his parents would approve of and is in an actual relationship with someone he actually wants to be with. So what could possibly go wrong? The stage for this book is set by a group of Korean American teens who were brought together because their parents immigrated to the United States together or around the same time, and thus became sort of a community. Other themes that reeled me into this book were this notion that the main character is always Korean first and then American, but never seen as just American. With my parents and I grapple with being the person that I am, someone born in Italy, raised in the United States by immigrants, and their expectations of me as their child. I cried multiple times reading this book because this feeling is so real. Trying to meet all of my parents and society's expectations of me without actually being able to define who I am, which I think I didn't really get to do until my later 20s, and I'm 30 now. And I'd say my current chapter of life is where I get to really define me. For Frank, it took being able to confront his extended family unit with all of the immigrant parents and their kids too, to be able to explain who he really is and who he wants to be with. Last note on this book is that whenever Frank is in a space with non-Koreans, he has to become the Korean expert. And in my friend group, I'm Filipino, I usually have to be that person. And it's exhausting being that represent Asian while not feeling Filipino enough because of my background, being an immigrant and then moving to another country, neither of which are the country of like my actual people. And I also don't feel Filipino American because I'm not. And I also don't really feel American because that's not what this country allows for. And yet, I also don't feel Filipino because I am not seen as Filipino by other Filipinos when I'm in the Philippines. I love this book and it gave me a lot of things to reflect on, so I definitely recommend it. Next up is Troublemaker by John Cho. So it's a semi-fictional story about two young Korean Americans in downtown LA during the Rodney King riots. Rodney King was an African-American man who was a victim of police brutality in the 1990s. This is an incredibly deep topic, and It was actually filmed by a bystander. There have been so many Black lives lost to police violence, and this book was a particular take on it from another marginalized group in Los Angeles, Koreans, which I think isn't as covered in a lot of stories because those groups also tend to be silenced in their history and their ability to talk about these events. The main character of this book at one point says these protests, this uprising, it's not just about today. It's about all of those lifetimes of injustices that have gone unheard. And the character continues that people set the streets of LA on fire not because they love to see it burn, but because they are in pain. And the riots are really such a small event compared to the massive amount of police violence, especially towards Black bodies. One of the biggest issues talked about during the pandemic has been the death of George Floyd, because people were actually home to pay attention to the videos of him being murdered. One of the officers responsible for his death is an Asian man. As Asians, we have to recognize the anti-Blackness within our elders, within our family members, and we need to dismantle these ideas and notions that white supremacy has told us Black people are dangerous, Black people are this, when they are not. White people are dangerous. White people are the ones that have been pitting us against each other for literally thousands of years as they have colonized and imperialized the whole world. We are stronger together, and we as a society must stand up for these lives that are constantly being lost day in and day out by violence. Violence that is rooted in a lack of understanding that other people can exist, other people can have rights, other people can just be. Next up is Maisie Chan's Last Chance by Lisa Yi. Maisie is a young girl and she goes to her mother's hometown, which is Last Chance, and she learns of her family history from her dying grandfather. I love the relationship between Maisie and her grandfather because of the exchange of oral histories being passed down from one generation to the next, practice I want to do more of with my own family. But the author did a great job connecting those lessons in card games to life, not always revealing all of your cards and moves, power of suggestion. Knowing that poker games never start at the beginning, they begin far before someone even sits down. Maisie in particular learns about paper sons from her grandfather. That is, people that were born in China and officially undocumented, but then immigrated to the United States by purchasing documentation which stated they were blood relative to Chinese people already in the United States and that were already citizens. While people in the story are not real, paper sons are very much real. And Last Chance represents a place that paper sons could go and work, be in community, and just have food that reminded them of home. You'll feel deep friendship, familial bonds, and ruptures, and a sense of the importance of maintaining and knowing our family history by reading this book. And the beauty in oral stories is that it's not in books. His books are written by the winners, the oppressors, and there's a reason Asian American studies have not existed until the last couple years in the United States, even though that movement started in the 70s in Berkeley. While it is important to know these stories, white supremacy will tell us it is not that important. Next up is Front Desk by Kelly Yang. In short, Front Desk is about a family moving from China to California and struggling to do so. It has an uplifting message based on power of community, words, and good-hearted actions. So this book is actually written for a middle grade kid. So let's estimate 10 to 12 years old. I was really curious how this story could be told to a child at that age. I was pleasantly surprised at the simplicity in which the book described the nuance of parents fighting due to their finances, money being rooted in every part of society, from taking up space somewhere to buying things, and to your own self-worth being attributed to money, and immigrant kids just having a unique experience in which they sometimes have to grow up faster because they have to take on family responsibilities in which non-immigrant kids never have to think about. The younger Mel, who struggled to make friends between 12 and 15, would have loved to read this book. So if you know somebody between that middle school age, I definitely recommend you find them and give them this book. Next is A Scatter of Light by Melinda Lo. Alright, so this book and the book after are both by Melinda Lo, so just be patient with me. So this one features a young woman Arya, who just graduated from high school, figuring out her queerness while spending the summer with her grandmother, who is an artist. Arya becomes friends with a group of other queer women, and just be ready for the messiness of situationships around the age of 18, okay? I really adore the relationship between Arya and her grandmother, Joan, who she calls Joan on a first name basis, as they both grieve for her grandfather. Arya plays old videos of her grandfather teaching physics while she goes through other belongings of his and is inspired to make her own art. She describes this time as a pocket of calm, and that all I had to do was sort files and listen to Grandpa tell me about the wave particularity of light. The whole book is written in this prose that really builds the world and feelings of the characters, but you can't always explain yourself clearly. And sometimes people don't understand because they're clinging to an idea of themselves, and any disturbance of that idea is devastating. And wisdom that her grandma passes on as she makes her first piece of art. An abstract painting is like excavating your emotions. There are layers to get through before you can uncover what it's about. Out of this batch of recommendations, Melinda Lowe is probably my favorite writer of all of them. Which brings me to Ash, also by Melinda Lowe. This is now my third book that I've read by this author, and I actually have the prequel for this book, which is Huntress, which I plan to read chapter by chapter with my partner. So stay tuned for that book review. So Ash is a lesbian retelling of Cinderella. Aisling, Ash, is more than just a princess story. It is about the tremendous grief of her mother, then her father's death, and then unfortunately ending up with her stepmother and stepsisters. This book is also more fantasy than we see in the Cinderella stories, which is mainly the magic of the fairy godmother. In Ash, the world, the society itself, is torn between believing and not believing that magic is still real, even though superstitions, charms, and fairies are very much there. The fairy that Ash mainly encounters even states, but over the centuries, almost all the magic within your people has disappeared. We do not know why. At the same time, your people often choose to ignore their own mortality. This world building piece really humanized the story because humans do tend to think that we'll live forever and nothing bad is going to happen to us, or are so shocked when something does happen that we are thrown off our course entirely. The belief in magic, as the fairy references here, is the notion that life and death really go hand in hand. To be able to create things must also be destroyed, especially in a world driven by numbers, money, capitalism, myself included. We as a society are guilty of believing we will last forever, so that philosophical take aside, Ash, scarred as she is from the death of her parents, hangs on to fairy tales because of her mother's interest in them. But her stepmother tells her she's silly for believing in them. The grief she feels is the biggest theme in the book, but it is also about how Ash learns to believe in herself again. It is thanks to Kaisa, a huntress, that's what the third book is about, that Ash realizes she can feel something again, something real, something past her grief, care for someone again, and to be cared by somebody again. So that's all I'll share. We'll just have to read to find out the rest. There's a Q&A at the end of the book between the author and the editor, and Melinda Lowe says, I think if there's one thing I regret, that I limited myself with Ash and chose to suppress the Chinese stuff, suppress the Chinese cultural influences I originally imagined. At the time, I know I wrote the best book that I could. This book was published in 2009, and while LGBTYA is having its moment now, there weren't many being written at this time. The author is talking about being worried a lesbian retelling of Cinderella would have been too much. I hope if there's one thing you get out of this video is knowing that whoever you are, however you identify, you are enough as you are. And the world needs to make space for you. And you should never have to be any less of yourself for the world. Unless you're being an asshole. It's a different story. Maybe be less of an asshole. So thanks for watching this Asian American YA book share. If you have any ideas or any book recommendations that I should read, leave them in the comments below. So until next time, Moviti.